We often hold well-behaved children in high regard. They are quiet and composed, polite in their interactions, attentive listeners to adults. They refrain from interrupting conversations, and they certainly don't display disruptive tantrums in public spaces. Parents beam with pride at their children's conduct. Teachers experience a sense of relief in their presence. Society, in general, tends to reward such behavior. But here's a question that we rarely ponder. Are these children genuinely emotionally healthy and balanced, or are they simply emotionally suppressed, maintaining a facade of silence? From a very young age, children begin to observe and internalize how the world around them responds to their actions and expressions. They quickly learn what behaviors are considered acceptable within their social circles. They identify which actions garner praise and positive attention. Conversely, they also become aware of what behaviors are typically ignored or dismissed. And many outwardly well-behaved children learn a particularly powerful, albeit potentially damaging, lesson early on in life. I am loved and accepted when I'm easy to manage and agreeable. Consider the following scenarios. When a child cries and the immediate response is, "Stop crying." When they express anger and they are told that's not a nice thing to do or say. When they voice their frustration and they are met with the comment, "Good kids don't act like that." The crucial point is that they don't actually stop feeling those emotions. Instead, they learn to stop showing them outwardly. On the surface, they may appear calm, collected, and composed. However, internally, their emotions begin to accumulate, unidentified, unacknowledged, unprocessed, and ultimately, unresolved. Anger is often directed inward, leading to potential self-destructive tendencies. Sadness gets buried deep down, festering beneath the surface. Fear cleverly hides behind a carefully constructed smile, masking true feelings of vulnerability. And tragically, no one truly notices the internal turmoil, primarily because the child is behaving perfectly according to societal expectations. Many well-behaved children develop into experts at keenly observing and reading the emotional atmosphere of a room. They possess the uncanny ability to sense underlying tension almost instantly. They become adept at anticipating adult reactions and responses. And they meticulously adjust their own behavior and expressions to proactively avoid potential conflict. They master the art of pleasing others, how to comply with expectations, and how to essentially stay invisible, blending into the background. Not because they genuinely want to behave this way, but primarily because they perceive that it's safer and more secure to do so. This isn't genuine discipline rooted in understanding and growth. This is, in essence, self-protection, a survival mechanism developed in response to perceived emotional threats. As these children mature and grow older, this deeply ingrained pattern of behavior often continues to persist. They evolve into teenagers who never cause any trouble or raise concerns, but also remain hesitant to openly talk about what they're genuinely going through internally. They become adults who appear calm and composed on the outside, but internally feel constantly overwhelmed by a myriad of suppressed emotions. They habitually apologize, even when they've done absolutely nothing wrong. They struggle immensely with the simple act of saying no to requests. They fear disappointing others far more than they fear betraying their own needs and desires. They were extensively taught how to behave according to external expectations, but were unfortunately never adequately taught how to understand, process, and healthily express their own internal emotions. And here's the particularly painful and ironic part of the situation. Most parents never consciously intended for this outcome to occur. They genuinely wanted their children to develop good manners. They desired to instill a sense of respect for authority and others. They sincerely wanted their child to achieve success and happiness in life. They were operating under the sincere belief that they were doing the right thing for their child's well-being. Parents often express sentiments like, "I just want my child to be well-behaved and a pleasure to be around. I don't want them to be difficult or cause problems. I simply want them to listen and follow instructions." However, children don't primarily hear parental intention. Instead, they primarily absorb the underlying meaning behind the words and actions. And the core message they often internalize is, "My feelings and emotions are inherently a problem." When a child's emotions are repeatedly dismissed, minimized, or hastily brushed aside, they gradually learn to disconnect from their own internal emotional landscape. They gradually stop asking themselves, "What am I truly feeling in this moment?" and instead begin to constantly ask themselves, "What do they want or expect from me in this situation?" This pattern of emotional disconnection doesn't magically disappear with age. It often manifests later in life as anxiety without any clear or identifiable cause, as chronic and persistent stress levels, as crippling perfectionism and self-doubt, as an overwhelming need to constantly please others, and sometimes even as clinical depression, skillfully hidden behind a facade of outward success and achievement. Emotionally healthy children don't always appear well-behaved according to conventional standards. They may express themselves by crying loudly when they're sad. They might ask uncomfortable or challenging questions that require thoughtful consideration. They may openly express feelings of anger, frustration, or disappointment when things don't go their way. And that open emotional expression can sometimes be difficult and challenging for adults to effectively handle. But it's crucial to remember that emotional expression is not misbehavior. It's an essential aspect of healthy child development and growth. The ultimate goal of parenting shouldn't be to raise children who never experience negative emotions. That's not only unrealistic, but also fundamentally impossible. Rather, the true goal is to raise children who understand what to do and how to cope constructively when those inevitable negative emotions inevitably arise. Instead of teaching children to suppress or deny their feelings, we can instead focus on teaching them how to understand, acknowledge, and process those emotions in a healthy manner. We can actively name and validate their emotions. I can see that you're feeling angry right now. That situation looks really frustrating for you. It makes perfect sense that you're feeling sad about that. We can effectively guide their behavior while simultaneously validating their underlying emotions. It's perfectly okay to feel angry. However, it's not okay to hurt other people, even when you're feeling angry. Let's try to figure this out together as a team. When children genuinely feel emotionally safe, secure, and supported, something truly surprising and transformative happens. They don't suddenly become wild, unruly, or out of control. In fact, they often become calmer and more regulated in their behavior. They feel genuinely seen and acknowledged for who they are. They feel heard and understood by the adults in their lives. They ultimately feel more secure and confident in their relationships. And as a result, their behavior tends to improve naturally and organically, primarily because their fundamental emotional needs are finally being met. Emotionally healthy children grow into emotionally healthy adults who trust and honor their own feelings and intuition, set healthy boundaries in relationships without experiencing guilt or remorse, communicate their thoughts and feelings honestly and assertively, handle conflicts and disagreements without excessive fear or anxiety. They don't feel the constant need to be perfect in order to feel worthy of love and belonging. They possess an unwavering knowledge that they fundamentally matter, even when they're feeling upset, vulnerable, or imperfect. So the next time we encounter a perfectly behaved child, instead of immediately asking, "How can we ensure that they continue to behave this way?" Perhaps we should instead pause and thoughtfully ask ourselves, do they truly feel safe enough to express their authentic selves without fear of judgment or rejection? Because a well-behaved child, on the surface, is not always necessarily a healthy child, deep down, but a child who feels genuinely seen, heard, and truly understood. Ultimately becomes an adult who possesses an unwavering sense of their own inherent worth.